Hello and welcome. I'm John Yeberg with NASA Public Affairs. Stories and predictions of the end of the world in December 2012 have been portrayed in film, stated in books, and blossomed on the internet. A panel of scientists are here with us today to discuss the 2012 rumors propagated across the spectrum. We're going to ask some common questions and take some from social media. If you have a question, use the hashtag #AskNASA on Twitter or on the live streaming page for the event on NASA Television's YouTube channel or the stream on NASA's Google Plus page. Let's start with having our panel members introduce themselves. Mitzi?
My name is Mitzi Adams. I'm a heliophysicist for Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and I have a special interest in sunspot magnetic fields, flare prediction, and coronal bright points. I frequently serve as a guest lecturer for the Von Braun Astronomical Society and for science courses at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where I've led several sessions of Theories of the Universe, a class that explores how various cultures perceive the cosmos, including my favorites, the Maya and Inca civilizations of Central and South America. I enjoy exploring strange new worlds and have hiked, run, and been cave diving in the Yucatan of Mexico, and explored Maya and Inca ruins in Guatemala and Peru.
So I'm Andrew Fraknoi, and I'm an astronomer and the chair of the astronomy department at Foothill College near San Francisco. I have students every year who are tremendously worried about such issues, so I'm delighted that we're going to be doing this roundtable. My specialty is dealing with astronomical pseudoscience or fiction science, things that are on the fringe of scientific ideas but are not really valid, and examining them and helping the public to understand them. I'm also the only non-NASA person on the panel. I'm the outside commentator, so that you can't imagine that this is some kind of government conspiracy.
Hi, I'm Lika Guhathakurta. I'm at NASA headquarters in the heliophysics division. My profession is as a heliophysicist, and I manage a program called Living with a Star, and that star is our sun. And the goal of this program is really to understand the sun and the Earth as a connected system, and sun's influence not only on our planet Earth, but every other planet, the interplanetary medium. This area of heliophysics has given rise to what we know as space weather. Heliophysics is the science of space weather. And I know that space weather is an ill-understood subject today because it's still in its infancy. And so I hope in today's discussion we'll be able to discuss some of the ideas behind space weather and some of the ideas of solar storms that are floating around that are not correct. Thank you.
My name is Paul Hertz. I'm the Director of Astrophysics at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. My training is as an astronomer. I've used telescopes all over the world, as well as many telescopes orbiting in space to study interesting phenomena throughout the universe. My specialty has been studying black holes and neutron stars and other objects which emit large numbers of X-rays. But I'm interested in just about anything that takes place beyond our planet.
I'm David Morrison. I'm a space scientist at NASA's Ames Research Center. Began career as an astronomer and planetary scientist, and then became one of the founders of the interdisciplinary study of astrobiology, the study of life in the universe. Currently, I also have a joint appointment as director of the Carl Sagan Center for the Study of Life in the Universe at the SETI Institute. For almost a decade, I have been answering the questions that the public send in about science to NASA's Ask an Astrobiology webpage, and that's a lot of fun, but in the last few years, the real science questions have been overwhelmed by questions about a 2012 doomsday, so I'm glad to be here to talk about this.
Hi, I'm Don Yeomans. I'm manager of NASA's Near Earth Object Program Office at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. And I'm supervisor of the Solar System Dynamics Group here at JPL. And it's our job to keep track of the planets, their past positions and their future positions, to keep track of the natural satellites, and also the hundreds of thousands of asteroids and comets that can, from time to time, get close to Earth. And if we do find one or two that do get close, it's our job to compute impact probabilities. And if there's a problem, we notify observers to provide additional data in hopes that these impact probabilities will go to zero, which they almost always do.
Thank you. Let's start with a question from Google+. Cal Singh Man asks, why is NASA even wasting their time doing a Hangout on Google+ if we have nothing to worry about?
Well, that's an interesting question. Many of us have asked the same question to ourselves because there is no true issue here. This is just a manufactured fantasy. But the fact is that many people are worried about it. And many of those people do write to NASA and ask for NASA to respond. In particular, I'm concerned about the young people who write to me and say they are terribly afraid that they can't sleep, they can't eat. Some of them have said they're contemplating suicide. There was one case of a teacher in Stockton who had the parents of two of her students come and say they were planning to kill their children and themselves to escape this apocalypse. So while it's a joke to many people and a mystery to others, there is a core of people who are truly concerned, and I think it's appropriate that NASA should answer these questions that are being sent to us.
Thanks. What is the origin of the prediction that the world will end in 2012? Where did that come from?
Andy, are you going to answer that?
I am. My microphone was muted. Excuse me. So can everyone hear me now? Yeah, good. So I think this is important to remember that this is not the first time we've heard predictions of doomsday and apocalypse. Those who were around in the year 2000 remember that there was a lot of calendar scare there too. Just like we're hearing now that the Mayan calendar is going to reset. In those days we thought the world was going to end because our computer calendars were going to reset. And I have a little chart which maybe we can put up that shows some of the very recent predictions of doomsday. There have been predictions like this throughout history. But in 1982, for example, there was a thought that the planets would align and a great earthquake would send California into the ocean. And much to the chagrin of some, California is still around. In 1999, Charles Berlitz predicted that there would be an end of the world and wrote a best-selling book about it. So we've had a number of these, and in each case, nothing much has happened. And here we come again. I think there have been a lot of different people who have jumped on board once the 2012 rumors started going and brought their own particular flavor of catastrophe to bear on this particular date of the winter solstice of 2012.
Andy, I would add to that only that there are these different threads. As you said, there's Nibiru going to crash into Earth, there's pole shifts, there's all sorts of other things, and they're really quite unconnected. It's just that they focus on this one date, and it's become a snowballing process. It's gone viral. There's nothing logical of why these different calamities should be associated with December 21st, but that's the situation we're in.
And David, tell the story about the movie 2012 and how they made the website, because I think that's a great story.
Well, it was interesting. I expect many of you have seen the movie 2012. It was a spectacular disaster flick. The fact is that the makers of the movie did not know about 2012 when they started. It had a different title. It was just going to be an end-of-the-world disaster flick. And at one point when they were starting production, someone walked in and said, I just was on the internet and heard that there are people really scared about 2012. So let's tack our movie onto that and give that title. The movie wasn't about 2012, but it is contributed to this broad concern that is propagated primarily on the internet. There are thousands of websites, there are thousands of YouTube videos that are all saying that there will be some disaster happening in 3 weeks.
It's interesting to point out that on the internet there are no referees, there are no filters, there are no reality checks, so it's a wild west out there, and folks who hear about extraordinary claims have to look for the extraordinary evidence that's required to support those claims.
And sadly, it's not just the web that's like this now. More and more sort of cable television channels are taking a tabloid approach where anything goes. So it's especially important for scientists to speak up and say, look, even if you've heard it on the History Channel, it doesn't mean it has to be true.
We have another question from Google+. It's Robin Vennerman is asking, was wondering how the Mayans picked a date to start their calendar. Why exactly, or most likely, on that day thousands of years ago? Seems interesting.
Well, the Maya believe in cycles, and the current calendar is actually one of several cycles that last for thousands of years. The current calendar probably began in somewhere around 3114, before the current era. And these cycles have gone on, and the idea of the cycles have been passed down through some of the mythology of the Maya. And this current one simply ends on December 21st or 23rd, depending on who's doing the translation of this year. The reason there is no other Maya calendar is because the Spanish arrived and the Maya civilization was essentially destroyed. They would have done essentially the same thing that we do and just create a new calendar after this cycle ended.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here from Twitter. It's Baby GVA asks, can you also talk about the galactic alignment?
Sure, I'll talk about that. As you know, as the Earth goes around the sun, and then different stars are up in the night sky every night. We get a sweep through the whole sky, and once a year, the direction to the center of the Milky Way galaxy will be right overhead, or right behind the sun. And in fact, in late December is the time that every year the center of the Milky Way galaxy is behind the sun, and so the Earth and the sun and the center of the Milky Way galaxy kind of sort of line up in late December every year. It's not December 21st, and it's not an exact alignment. The sun will be about 10 of its own widths away from the exact direction to the galactic center when they get as close as they're going to get this year. And this year is no different than any other year.
And I guess it's important to point out to those of our listeners who are not astronomy buffs that the distance between us and the center of the galaxy is absolutely mind-boggling. So that it's something like 26,000 light years, where each light year is 6,000 billion miles. So the notion that something at the center of the galaxy could cause doomsday on Earth is a complete misunderstanding of how truly astronomical the distances are between us and the center of the Milky Way.
And Andy, as an example, even though the black hole at the center of the galaxy weighs 1,000,000 times as much as the sun, it's so far away that its gravity is less than 1/1,000,000th the gravity that the sun, on the Earth, the gravity effect of this black hole at the center of the galaxy is less than 1/1,000,000th the gravity effect that the sun has on the Earth.
There's a strange variant on this that that said that. Go ahead, Don.
Well, I was just going to point out, reinforce what Paul said, that the so-called galactic alignment takes place every year without consequence and has done so for millions of years. So there's nothing to worry about.
Go ahead, David.
I'm just going to say it's a silly variant, but I've heard it many times. There are some people who interpret this as saying the Earth is going to be in the center of the galaxy, that somehow it's going to travel 30,000 light years and collide with that black hole. Goodness knows where these things get going, but they are propagated on the internet, and as has been pointed out, there's nobody there to moderate, to say what's right and what's wrong. It's been described that the internet is the world's greatest library without the benefit of librarians.
is it possible, could planets align in a way that could have some sort of impact on Earth? Is that even feasible?
Well, planets align all the time, but the only objects that have a noticeable effect on the Earth, tidal effects, are the Moon, which is very close and massive, and the Sun, which is extraordinarily massive. Even if the Sun, Earth, and Jupiter were aligned, and they do align from time to time, the effect of Jupiter on the Earth is much less than 1% of the daily effect that our Moon has on us. So alignments occur. They're interesting from a pictorial point of view, but they really have no bearing on an effect upon the Earth.
Okay, thank
Don,
you.
Isn't it also true that that in this case, when you look at where the planets are in the sky, they're pretty much scattered all over on December 21st. It's about as far from an alignment of planets as you could get.
That's true, but even if they were aligned, it would make no difference.
Here's a question that we get asked a lot just on social media and comments sections on the web. Is NASA predicting a total blackout of Earth on December 23rd to December 25th?
What?
No. I don't know where it came from, but we're getting asked that.
It's very complicated where some of these rumors emerge. Apparently there is a note, some kind of email going around. Sometimes some religious traditions get confused with the ideas that the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. So it's completely without scientific basis.
Again, folks have to understand that if they see something on the internet and it's an extraordinary claim, as Carl Sagan pointed out time and time again, you need extraordinary evidence to back it up. And there is no evidence for this 3-day blackout or any of these other phenomena that we're discussing.
This is not the first time that the blackout came along, by the way. There was a similar kind of interest and concern about Comet Elenin, the little comet that came along in 2011 and disintegrated. And there were firm predictions on the web then that that comet was going to come between the Earth and the Sun and cause a 3-day blackout at the end of September of last year. By then, the comet had disintegrated, but it was a crazy idea then, too.
It's really fascinating. I think, some of the questions that we are getting, I'm wondering, are these sort of fear generated in the people only in the Northern Hemisphere? Because if there is a winter solstice somewhere, there is a summer solstice going on somewhere else. And so obviously the entire planet is not affected. So it's kind of curious.
And for a 3-day blackout to occur, something weird would have to happen with the sun. And there's nothing we know of physically that would allow the sun to turn off for 3 days and then turn back on.
Well, thank you for shedding light on that question. Hopefully people are tuning in that have been asking it. We have one from Twitter. It's at iPod7223 asks, been hearing a lot about Nibiru, the planet, the fictional planet, and how it spells certain doom for our little blue planet. Care to shed some light on this?
Probably I have had more questions from the public about this Nibiru, or Planet X, as they often call it. And it's one of the associations also with NASA, because some people go back to the 1983 IRAS, the first astronomical infrared satellite that carried out a survey, and of course found many new objects that no one had seen before. At the time, there was speculation that one or more of them might be a new planet at the outer edge of the solar system. That wasn't true. It was the truth was found. They were all extragalactic objects, millions of light years away. But there are people who think that somehow NASA has been doing a cover-up ever since. A cover-up of a planet called Nibiru, named by the ancient Sumerians, that in the normal description has a 3,600-year orbit. So it comes back into the inner solar system every 3,600 years. And each time it comes in, it either hits the Earth or almost hits the Earth. This time it's supposed to hit the Earth and destroy us. And this is such a pervasive idea that makes no sense, because if it were there, we could see it. If there were an object, a planet as big as the Earth or bigger that was headed into the inner solar system, astronomers like Don Yeomans And the people he works with would have been tracking it for a decade at least. And by now, it would be the brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon. Anybody can go out and see it. You can dispel this rumor yourself. You don't have to ask the government or ask scientists. Just go out and look at the sky, and you will find no new bright object headed for the Earth. Similarly, if there were such a planet, its gravity would be messing with the orbits of the planets. And again, if you go look at what these scientists are studying, there is no way that a change in the orbits of the planets would happen without it being immediately detected.
I think it's interesting to note, as Dave has pointed out many times, that the most recent prediction of Nibiru coming close to the Earth was provided by a lady, Nancy, what's her name, Leader, who claims to be channeling aliens around the star system Zeta Reticuli. So that should raise a large red flag right there.
Changing subjects a little bit, what is this polar shift theory that the Earth crust does a 180-degree rotation?
Two kinds of poles. We have the pole of rotation, the kind of imaginary stick or axis which goes through the Earth and around which we spin, is called our rotation pole. And then we have another set of poles called the magnetic poles, where the Earth acts like a magnet and the magnetic influence has a north and south pole to it. And over long geological periods, the magnetic poles of the Earth drift a little bit because of the complexity of the electrical currents inside our planet. And also from time to time, over time scales of millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years, we can have a flip where the North Pole becomes the South Pole magnetically and the magnetic South becomes North. Somehow people have gotten that mixed up with the rotational pole. So they say, my goodness, on December 21st, in one day, there's going to be a flip of the Earth's rotation so that we're going to either rotate the other way or the whole planet is going to turn upside down. This is absolutely ridiculous. The force required to do that, to change the way our planet rotates, would require an enormous other body to come here and affect us. And we've just heard that such a body would be immediately visible to all of us. And without that, there's no way to change the rotation of a huge planet like the Earth. So people get mixed up between the long geological trend of changes in our magnetic field and our rotation. And as a result of this comes this doomsday rumor that on the winter solstice, we're going to be rotating wrong. There's just nothing to that.
Andy, if that does, when the magnetic shift does happen, could that impact life on Earth?
Well, we have never during historic times experienced such a magnetic change, but we do know that it's a very gradual process. It would happen over a long period of time, perhaps thousands of years, and we know that it's happened. We have geological evidence from the rocks where the magnetism is recorded that it's happened many times, and yet life on Earth has continued to thrive and evolve. So there may well be a little bit more radiation, there may be more particles coming from space when the magnetic field of the Earth changes, but certainly we know that life has survived and we're all still here.
Thank you. And here's a question that we know is a real danger to Earth, and that's being hit by a meteor. Is there any danger or possibility this could happen in the year 2012, sometime in December?
No, the Earth is actually hit by meteors on a daily basis. I mean, basketball-sized objects come in a couple times a day. They don't do any damage because they burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. Volkswagen-sized objects come in every couple of weeks. Again, they're too small to make it all the way through the Earth's atmosphere, but they are recorded by down-looking Defense Department sensors. So the Earth is plummeted with hundreds of tons of material every day. But in order for an object to come through the Earth's atmosphere and cause ground damage, it has to be about 40 meters in diameter or larger. And those types of objects don't occur but every 500 years. And we know of no objects that are really of a concern to Earth either this December or for the next several years.
Thanks. I know. Go ahead.
Should you perhaps add that that we know these things because of the NASA Space Guard survey, that there is a real long-term concern about possible impacts, and that's why for the last almost 20 years we have been scanning the sky specifically looking for asteroids, near-Earth asteroids, and have a catalog of about 10,000 of them now with determined orbits. And I always mention to people that one result of that is there has not been a single object found that's on a collision course with Earth.
That's true. I should mention the NASA program, Near Earth Object Program, that is actively searching the skies on a nightly basis and finding more and more of these objects so that we can take the observations they provide and make predictions of where these objects will be in the future. And if they do get close, which they do from time to time, in fact, we had one hit in 2008, a small one, over northern Sudan, and we predicted that one correctly. So whereas 30 years ago, there was very little effort by anyone to observe and track these objects, that is not the case any longer. NASA is very aware of this issue and is making great strides to predict any large objects that are incoming.
And I would add to that, as I'm sure you would, that the information is all made public, that you have a beautiful website updated every day. There's no sort of secrecy governing these objects, and people can go look for themselves for all the known objects and the newly discovered ones and see what their orbits are.
That's true. In fact, we even have a widget that's available giving the next 5 close Earth approaches, and we have a Twitter feed that has something like 950,000 people taking part. So there's full transparency. Everything is put out there immediately on our website. We couldn't keep a secret even if we wanted to. So it's all out there almost immediately.
I think I'd like to add to it. It is not a concern just for NASA or for United States. It's an international concern, and there is actually an active agenda within United Nations Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space that actually looks at near-Earth asteroid, and it's not NASA, but many other countries join in with their telescopes to really track these objects. So I think as an international community, we are very aware of the consequences of such an object, and we are keeping eyes on this. So this is an important topic, and it is on everyone's radar screen.
I think it's very good to point that out, because many of the people who write to me just don't understand how astronomy and NASA work. They think that somehow NASA controls all the telescopes in the world, and Paul, I know you control a lot of them, but not all of them, that the astronomers of the world all work for NASA, and so NASA has a control on information, when in fact there is a wide international astronomical community. In the case of something like Nibiru, there are at least 100,000 astronomers, amateur and professional, in 100 different countries that could have been looking. So there's no possibility of hiding something that's in the sky.
And let me just add, Don pointed out that all of our data on the asteroids that we're tracking is put on the web for everybody to take advantage of. That's in fact true of all NASA data, whether it's astronomical data, planetary data, solar data, or Earth science data. You can go to the web and get access to all the data that NASA's satellites are collecting. We make it available so that all scientists around the world can use it, and we make it available so that all interested citizens can learn from it and take advantage of it.
Thanks, everyone. That's a really thorough explanation. We have, I think we touched on this before, but on Twitter, Sophie Emma asks, could the black hole found in the center of the Milky Way have an effect on Earth? Is that a possibility at all?
I'll take that one, and the answer is no. As we've already pointed out, that black hole is 28,000 light years away, which is tremendously distant. Not only that, but of course, the reason why we call black holes is because they don't emit any radiation. That they only have gravitational attraction. The gravitational attraction is, as I mentioned before, less than 1/1,000,000th that from the Earth. We can't even see the black hole at the center of the galaxy. The only reason we know it's there is because we can see stars orbiting it, and that's how we can detect it, and we can measure its brightness. We can also see X-rays from dust that falls into the black hole at the center of the galaxy. But those X-rays are so far away that they have no impact even on stars in their vicinity, much less the Earth.
Thank you. I have another question from Twitter. It's Ramon_305 asks, do you have any news on solar activity? What are the chances of a major solar flare hitting Earth's atmosphere?
I'll take that one first, and Mitzi probably will join me. I think we have lots of news on solar activity. For one, in this case, it happens to be NASA. NASA spacecraft has literally surrounded the sun. We have many spacecraft that is looking at the sun from different vantage point. And so there is nothing that happens on the surface of the sun that goes unnoticed by the spacecraft. So we are able to track the progression of solar activity. Now, we all know that the sun goes through an activity cycle. Every 11 years, what you find are that the magnetic field on the sun increases and then decreases, and what happens as a phenomenon on the photosphere of the sun, that sunspot numbers increases, and then sunspot number decreases. Sometimes it just completely vanishes from the photosphere or the lit up side of the sun, and that's what we call a solar cycle, maximum to minimum. In the space age that we have been tracking the sun, let's say like some 50 years, what we have seen in solar activity is that the solar activity had been on the rise up until this last solar minimum. The solar minimum of the last cycle, 23, was rather long and protruded solar minimum. They were almost 2 years when we had very few sunspot or no sunspots at all. And as we came out of that solar cycle, solar minimum, and started rising into solar cycle 24, NOAA does the prediction for solar activity, solar storms impinging on Earth. And what they determined is that there is a scale, it's not a very real thing. And I'll show you a graph from the NOAA side that told us, what would this cycle look like? And every solar cycle, scientists kind of come together and bat around and, we come to some kind of understanding. What is our expectation based on the latest understanding of physics? And so what we are finding in this solar cycle is sort of the wimpiest solar cycle in the space age. It is lower than what we had even expected. So now why is that important? Storms happen all the time on the sun. Okay? If you have a strong solar cycle, the frequency of the storms increases, but their intensity has nothing to do with the frequency. So you can have a weak solar cycle and you can still have a really strong solar storm, but the frequency is the one that gives us sort of a probabilistic sense, right? So the question is there going to be a solar storm, sufficiently large that can hit us, right? And that it's a probabilistic question. These questions are like the questions we ask of 100-year flood, 100-year super volcano, something like that. Can it happen? We can't say it won't happen, but we have enough understanding to say that it doesn't look like something like that is going to happen. But even if we were to get a really large solar storm, the interesting thing is that now because we can see and track the sun from all sides, we can actually predict that there is an active region emerging, that the active region has the potential to create a really large storm. So we can start warning people, we meaning NOAA in this case, we work closely with NOAA, and what we can do is we can turn up our sensitive electronics, our power grid, anything that is sort of electromagnetic in nature has the potential to be impacted by solar storms. These storms really have no direct effect on human beings in terms of a huge radiation, or there is no fire created, none of those, but electronics can be severely damaged. And as we know, our societies are becoming more and more technologically dependent. So if you were to ask me, are we going to get a major solar flare on December 21st? I could tell you something, because we are actually looking at the sun, and it takes about almost a month, let's say, from the far side of the sun to come in front of us. And today is 28. So I can say, what we can already, because we have spacecraft, Stereo A, Stereo B, SOHO, Solar Dynamics Observatory, we know all the sunspots that's out there that's coming towards us. We can actually penetrate beneath the sun also with our telescopes and say what is emerging. So we will have a pretty good idea if something is forming rapidly and coming at us. So I think we'll be able to warn you, guide you. It is very unlikely that we are going to get something huge.
Would you like to respond to the question that I've received several times? The people say, it's not just the sun, but there is a tear in our magnetosphere, that the magnetosphere is collapsing, that our natural protection is going away. How do you answer that question?
Yes, it's going to be a little bit difficult in terms of, because it's a technical jargon, but let's talk about the magnetosphere. How are we protected from these solar particles that come and impinge on us? There were questions before, about polar shift and all that. Now, Earth is tremendously blessed and lucky that it has a magnetosphere. In fact, I might even venture as far out to say that perhaps this magnetosphere, which kind of shields us like a cocoon from these harmful radiations of the sun, has enabled life to have been generated on this planet. Now, what happens when these particles come and impinge on the magnetosphere? These are all magnetic field lines connecting with each other. There is reconnection happening, and when this reconnection happens, these particles can actually propagate into our planet. And this is when we begin to see aurora. If we are seeing an aurora, the northern and southern lights, that tells us that a solar storm has actually generated a geomagnetic storm, which is a storm in our own planet. And then these particles can actually propagate down, create electromagnetic fluctuation, which creates different conditions in the ionosphere that controls our lot of our satellites for communication, navigation, etc. Furthermore, these fluctuations have the ability to really produce huge amount of voltage fluctuation on power grid, which can get tripped and which can actually go out. And these things have happened, like in 1989 Hydro-Quebec failure. That's how you can be in darkness, because your power system failed. So yes, these particles can penetrate through our magnetosphere, but even that we are able to kind of guide people through whether a particular storm has the kind of magnetic field orientation that will allow it to connect up with our own magnetosphere.
But the question that I get is that somehow something recently has happened, that the magnetosphere is going away. And I think you're saying that's not true, that it's still there and it's still protecting us.
It's very much there. And in fact, we just launched another pair of satellites called Van Allen probes. Some of those results will be out during this upcoming meeting that clearly shows that our magnetosphere not only exists, sometimes it creates kind of new radiation belts because of its interaction with solar energetic particles.
And actually, that aside from solar flares, what kind of solar activity eventually, whether it's 1,000, million years from now, could eventually impact life here on Earth? I'm assuming that eventually something with the sun expansion or will eventually could have an impact. What is that, and when would that estimated be, where we could look at something that could have a major impact that we know of?
Are you talking of the sun as an astrophysical object?
Yes.
As it morphs into, sun is kind of a very ordinary star, so it's not going to produce a supernova, and I think all it will do is become a red giant, and then it's going to expand tremendously, and at some point, I think it's going to envelop our planet Earth and go all the way to Mars. But that's billions of years away. And I will ask Paul perhaps to comment on that.
Paul, are you with us?
Sorry, I was muted. The sun is a fairly ordinary star. We've observed many stars similar to the sun throughout the galaxy at different stages of their evolution. Our best understanding of the future of the sun, which we can only get from looking at other stars that are older than the sun and therefore have gone through later stages of their life than the sun has, is that the sun will indeed use up the hydrogen at the center of its core. That will cause it to expand into a red giant. It will eventually get certainly as big as the orbit of Venus. We don't know if it will get out to the orbit of the Earth, but it will certainly change the weather on the Earth and the climate quite substantially. But in case anybody is getting concerned about this happening in December, that's not the case. This will happen in about 5 billion years. And so we have plenty of time to contemplate what we might do in 5 billion years when the sun reaches later parts of its lifetime.
So I'm not taking out red giant insurance on my home.
This is just a general question for everybody, I suppose. Are there, in your field, are there any threats to Earth in 2012 or any time in the near future that we should be concerned about?
Yes.
I don't think there's any credible threats that we know about in the near future. There's an interesting close Earth approach by an asteroid called 2012 DA14 next February 15th. It's going to pass within 4.5 Earth radii of the Earth's surface, which is within the geosynchronous satellite belts. So you've got this object that's coming closer to the Earth, and you've got satellites further away that will be announcing its arrival. It's an object whose orbit is well known. It cannot get any closer than 4.5 Earth radii, so it's going to be an interesting target for astronomers, especially radar astronomers, but it's not a threat.
From an astronomical point of view, 2012 is like any other year. The Earth goes around the sun, the Earth rotates, the sun is moving through interstellar space, all the planets are in their orbits, and there's nothing happening this year that's special.
So if I can give you a slightly whimsical answer, but I think a relatively important one, I think one of the greatest threats to Earth in 2012 is the low level of science education and public knowledge. And I think this entire discussion and the fears that have been generated illustrates how much more NASA, the scientific community, and those of us in science education still need to do. It's really sad that so many people are worried and writing to David Morrison. It's really sad that our schools have not taught skeptical thinking, have not helped students to distinguish between the reality and the fantasy of what's going on in these areas. So I think if people are concerned about cosmic threats, part of that is a threat to our understanding of science that comes from insufficient science education. And I hope we can all redouble our efforts to help students understand the world better.
I'm also worried about that. In fact, I think the great threat is really in this month, because there are literally millions of people who are afraid, who think the world will end, and in particular children, the children who are contemplating suicide, the children that are worried that Christmas won't come this year. And I think it's evil for people to propagate rumors on the internet to frighten children. And I think all these frightened children are a real problem, and I hope it'll go away soon, but we need to protect ourselves and our children from this sort of crazy ideas. As Andy says, the best way to protect ourselves is to learn enough science to recognize just how silly these threats supposedly are.
And I'd like to add to that, I think this is absolutely true. Science education and outreach is very, very important in this regard. As a matter of fact, the fact that we are all here spending an hour doing this, it is an outreach activity to really educate people the best we can on this short period of time, I wanted to share actually one item with you, and that is if anyone is interested in tracking the sun, we have something called 3D Sun app, both on iPhone and Android, and of course it's on the website. And so you can actually, this is what I was saying, I wasn't kidding. We get this sort of 24/7. We have data that is transmitted to us by several satellites, NASA satellites, with which we are actually seeing the sun, both the far side and the front side, almost instantaneously. But on this site, you can actually get information if there is a solar flare happening, if there is an active region emerging. So you can be educated. There are other little tidbits in there that is informative for our listeners on the internet.
I would agree with everybody about science literacy. I think that's really important. I think the greatest threat to Earth in 2012, at the end of this year, and in the future, is just from the human race itself.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to, without getting derailed into a long discussion of global warming, is to emphasize that in fact our own actions may represent a far greater threat to the planet than anything that the cosmos is throwing at us.
And this question actually ties in well to one that was asked to us on YouTube from Charles Thilking. He asks, given all the myths, 2012, moon landing, etc., what methods can a layperson who is questioning these things do to research and verify the research they do to help rest their fears/concerns?
That's an excellent question, and I get it often. Obviously, these are complicated scientific issues, and not everybody is going to know all the science. What I tell people first is look it up in Wikipedia. That is such a good resource on the internet. Of course, it's not perfect. Of course, some things there are wrong, but they tend to be corrected very quickly. For instance, just last week, someone put up a silly thing about a meteor 10 times the size of the Earth headed for the Earth, and it was up for just under 2 hours before someone took it down. So, you know, people can write to Ask an Astrobiologist and other Ask a Scientist things. They can learn science, that's great, but when you're faced with an immediate issue, when you see something that just doesn't quite make sense for you, I suggest looking it up in Wikipedia.
And another really good resource that we can perhaps mention is that there's an organization of scientists, educators, magicians, and others who are good at figuring out tricks of irrational thinking. It's called the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The website is www.csicop.org. And this organization publishes a newsletter called The Skeptical Inquirer. David has been very active in writing for them. I think this is an excellent source of sort of rational or skeptical examination of paranormal claims.
Thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add, nasa.gov has a webpage that addresses a lot of these questions. You can visit at nasa.gov/2012. I have one final question for the group, and if you have any closing remarks when answering this question, this would be a good time. It'd be nice if everybody, maybe in order that we started off when, just kind of gives a question, an answer to this. On Twitter, at Esther Bangardner asks, have you guys made any plans for December 21st?
I've made a few plans for December 21st. I'm actually going to be going to Atlanta for Christmas, and on December 22nd, I'm running a 5K. So December 21st, I'll probably be resting a little bit and enjoying the solstice.
Well, I guess the more important question is whether we have plans for December 22nd and thereafter. David and I participated this summer in a colloquium for our symposium for the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, where a lot of science educators were there. And we've been encouraging science museums, schools, and other institutions to stay open, if possible, through that evening of December 21st and have a little party the first hour of December 22nd. I certainly will be celebrating when December 22nd rolls around. But I think more importantly, what I think we all ought to be encouraging science teachers and other educators to do is to be on the lookout for the next doomsday. Because for sure, when this doomsday is over, someone's going to come up with another date when the world is going to end. And perhaps some of the tools that we've learned to use for this particular doomsday will be helpful in preventing fear about future doomsdays to come.
I think I'm going to start my first day of holiday vacation on 21st with children home from college. It's solstice, so obviously if it's not snowing outside, we'll have a bonfire, be happy, eat, drink, and be merry. And I would suggest people who are celebrating winter solstice and the special holiday in whichever hemisphere you are, I think just celebrate it.
Well, I'm very jealous of Lika and Mitzi for their plans. I'm having a very important review here at NASA headquarters on December 21st for a project with the European Space Agency to build a telescope, put it in space to study dark energy, and the whole team will be here to have the review and get approval for the next stage of that project.
It's like Superstorm Sandy, the droughts, the floods, all of these things are happening. And that is a real threat to the Earth, not a fantasy like December 21st, 2012 doomsday.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with something David just said. There's a plot on the bulletin board outside my office of the monthly rise in sea level as the ice caps in Greenland disappears. So global warming is a real issue, and colleagues, and make sure that they don't dismiss this type of disaster prediction as something silly and well outside their area of expertise and something they don't have to concern themselves with. We all have to concern ourselves with what the public thinks. These folks are paying our salaries. They need to know the truth. They need to know where to go for the absolute best information, be it a NASA site or an academic site. So we need to shake our colleagues into action and make them talk to the public, make them respond the way we have. And I'd like to thank headquarters for putting this on. I think it's a great start. And for December 21st and 2nd, if history is any guide, I think I'll probably be doing last-minute shopping again and running out to get the Christmas tree.
Great. I want to thank our panelists for joining us. This has been a fantastic and lively conversation. That concludes our 2012 Google Plus Hangout. If your question wasn't answered here today, please visit us on the web or on social media and ask away. Our Twitter and Google Plus, or on Google Plus or Twitter, use the hashtag #AskNASA, and we'll try to answer your question and get back to you as soon as possible. And thanks to everyone for joining us, asking questions. Have a great afternoon.